so much for joining our program, Nira Yuval-Davis. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you obviously about the Israeli-Palestinian issue, you know, the human tragedy that's unfolding on everybody's television screens. I'd like to know your feelings on that.
Yes, it is a human tragedy, and it's more than that. And obviously it's important to emphasize that it is not something that started now or even at 67 or even at 48. This is something that has been going on in different ways, and not to the terrible and horrible way that it is now, but it was always in many ways horrible, since the beginning of the settler colonial project of the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement sought to solve the so-called Jewish problem in terms of the terrible persecution and anti-Semitism, and what culminated in the extermination and genocide of Jews under the Nazis, and before that in various pogroms in East Europe. But of course, they did it in the form that was popular during that time of settler colonialism, and in a way the indigenous people, in this case the Palestinians, were completely invisible, or when they were visible there were all kinds of assumptions that either they will disappear, or they will by assimilation, or like in the utopian Alt-Neuland romance of Herzl, that they will be willingly a second-rate citizen. So this is when it all kind of started. But what is happening now in Gaza is, of course, the latest manifestation. It's the whole evolution and various dislocations that this conflict has happened during more than 100 years, and with all its national, regional, and global implications.
I mean, in a sense, when you look at this issue, you often find people either siding with the Israeli state or siding with Hamas and the Islamists, whereas in fact there are so many people who are opposed to both and who want real peace.
Yes, I mean, we should not forget that the birth of Hamas was by the security service, held and supported by the security services of Israel, the same way the Taliban was birthed and supported by the CIA, because they thought that this old British imperial note of divide and rule is going to be the best weapon in order to weaken the PLO and divide the Palestinian resistance. Unfortunately, they succeeded too well, but what of course they didn't, in this kind of racist kind of superiority, they didn't kind of think that the Hamas and the Palestinians in general are not just puppets. They have their own agency, and of course they were using the support that has been given to them in order to promote their own project, which is of course Muslim fundamentalism. And unfortunately now this is a very wide and rising political project of belonging and of invasion, and we see for the first time in the history of the Middle East, we see a series of territorial controls by Muslim fundamentalists. For example, the ISIS in Syria, and what is happening in Iraq, and what is happening in Libya. So we cannot just, and of course all the ongoing fights in Egypt. So we cannot see the role of Hamas in Gaza in an isolated way. And this is one of the reasons that once the Palestinian Authority and the PLO were willing to have a unity government with the Hamas, Israel became so scared by it. And in a way, what is happening now is a direct result to the Israeli government being absolutely determined not to facilitate this unity government. And in this sense, they achieved this immediate goal. But at what cost? The other goal that they have in order to end Palestinian resistance, especially in Gaza, which has complete blockade, and especially now when the military junta in Egypt cooperates so closely with Israel, so they don't have any outlets also on the Egyptian side, as well as the Israeli side, as well as the sea, then in a way they have almost nothing to lose, except that, of course, those that they are very willing to sacrifice the women and children and people. But on the other hand, people will not resist them because there is no alternative. Unless Israel and the world, by pressurizing Israel, would allow space for alternatives to emerge, that they are not going to exist.
And sometimes when you look at the situation, you get the sense that neither Israeli government nor Hamas want peace. They don't want a solution because they sort of seem to be feeding off and using this situation as a legitimization for their own
Yes, but I mean, the thing is, though, when people said peace, and in Israel I grew up this kind of notion of peace, I mean, each side wants peace on condition that nothing else will change. And definitely Israel wants peace when all its privileged position to remain, and the Palestinians would maybe agree peace when they dominate, and the whole kind of settler project would disappear. But you cannot solve one calamity by creating another, in the same way that you couldn't solve the persecution of Jews by the establishment of a Zionist settler colonial project. You cannot solve. I mean, there is a reality of a people already for more than 100 years that they have no other homeland and they belong to that country. In the same way that another settler colonial project in the United States, in Australia, in Canada, in South Africa, the people are there. But unfortunately, unlike in South Africa, there haven't been an emergence of a counter-ideology in which both the indigenous people and the settlers who want coexistence, who want peace, but on equal terms, to develop. There have been beginnings some years ago, but of course at the moment people don't see the space. One of the differences that one can see is that in 1982, when Israel invaded Beirut, there was a mass demonstration of more than 40,000 Israelis, most of them still saw themselves as Zionists, who protested against the war. Now there are several hundreds, and they are beaten up. I mean, the extreme right in Israel is now in a mode of terrible celebratory racialization that they've never been before. People are, I saw, dancing, death to the Arabs, celebrating. The children were killed in school, and beating up people in the street, and if they refuse to, if they're Arabs and if they're Jews and refuse to say death to the Arabs, they beat them as well, and they call them that they are not human beings. So this is a fascization in a way that is unprecedented in the history of Israel. Although the racialized Zionist ideology has been there from the beginning, it has never, ever been so horrific. And this is what's so frightening. And of course, the response to it from the other side is not going to see sudden enlightenment and humanism and tolerance. Everything is just going to reinforce each other. And this is really bleak.
I mean, it's bleak. And do you see any hope for the sort of, the resistance?
I think that politics of hope is very important in order for not all of us not to kind of just completely despair and give up. And in this sense, Gramsci, pessimism of the mind, optimism of the soul is very important. And there are youngsters as well as older people who see the paradoxes, the horrible catch-22 situations, and they do want the way out. But emotions are not enough. You need to have some kind of a lever of power to be able to change it. And this is why, unfortunately, only the superpowers are going to be able to put enough pressure on Israel in order to do it. I mean, but today there was declaration of 72 hours so-called military ceasefire that was broken by both sides after 2 hours. They were supposed to all meet in Egypt. I mean, very interestingly also, in this recent round, the interest of the Gulf regimes of Qatar and Saudi and as well as Turkey, I mean, the regional kind of power and oil economies and so on are very much also much more focused. A gas has been discovered in the Mediterranean between near Israel, Gaza, and Cyprus. So this is another neoliberal kind of pressure to focus around the issue of Gaza. So it doesn't look very...
What do you think the solution is to the situation?
Well, I mean, when you say solution, there is a
how can we get
solution,
a two-state,
ideological solution.
how can we get a two-state solution?
I don't think that most of those who preach two-state solution see the conflict between Israel and Palestine as a border solution. And in a way, in Gaza now, after the Israeli settlements were dismantled by the withdrawal under Sharon because they didn't want to continue a direct rule over Gaza because it is such a horrible mess for them. So it does look as if it's a territorial conflict, although what Israel is now done, the so-called buffer zone, is already more than a third of this very tiny territory of Gaza in which millions live. So this in itself is horrible. But 20% of Israeli citizens are Palestinians. And there are so many settlers since 1967. So this is, how many years? It's almost 50 years. So you cannot solve it by two states unless you are going to generate a tremendous exchange of population and so on. And of course, a tremendous exchange of population have taken place in 1948 by the creation of the Palestinian refugee problem. But in a way, in the so-called Oslo peace process, the refugees were kept completely out of the picture. So where are they going to live? Most of the people had loyalty and belonging to their own village, to their own or region. So the whole notion of Palestine, I mean, Israel doesn't have borders in the kind of conventional kind of terms, and Palestine doesn't have borders also in this kind of way. So probably, eventually, like in South Africa, like in other settler societies, people will have to learn to live with each other, but at the same time, or create some kind of an equitable and agreed process of fair. But this was going to reinforce such racializations. But at the moment, the underlying conditions for either solution do not exist. You need a process of rapprochement in which some trust will be built. And there was an historical window of opportunity after the first Gulf War in the Madrid conference in which Israel for the first time realized that they cannot solve the issue in a military way, in which they realized that United States is their ally, but in the Gulf War they were embarrassed by them. They forbade them to fight. They just put them in these shelters from the gas and so on. So then there was an opportunity, but the negotiation started in Washington, and then in the back rooms in Oslo, they did a parallel process in which peace was used as a continuation of war in order to crystallize Israeli domination over the Palestinians. And as we all know, eventually all this broke down, and with it, the beginning of trust and the beginning of hope. And broken trust and hope are much more difficult to reestablish. So in some way, when we were all a bit more innocent before the beginning of the Oslo process, it was easier than now. But of course, eventually, we are part of history, so there will be some kind of a resolution, even if this resolution would be the continuation of Israel as a warfare society, the continuation of the Palestinian society as a refugee society. But what you call solution is very rarely, there is no end of history in which, like in a chess game when it's finished, it never finishes. It always continues to move and metamorphose in a way that all too often for us on the left and feminist and anti-racist and anti-fundamentalist is not what we would like to see or what we struggle to see. I mean, but that's one of my down moments, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.